Old Hollywood, the glamour, the glitz, the legends. But behind the flashing lights and flawless smiles, some of the biggest stars were hiding secrets that could rewrite how we see them forever. In today's episode of Classic Hollywood, we pull back the curtain on 10 iconic stars who may not have been the angels we imagined. From harsh parenting and brutal rivalries to courtroom scandals and shocking personal beliefs, these stories will leave you stunned. Let's dive into the dark side of silver screen legends. No 10. He was America's favorite crooner, the velvet-voiced gentleman who gave us White Christmas, enchanted audiences with his laid-back charm, and helped define the golden age of music and film. But behind closed doors, the real Bing Crosby was anything but merry. According to his eldest son, Gary Crosby, Bing ruled his household with an iron fist, not love, not warmth. In his controversial memoir, Going My Own Way, Gary painted a grim portrait of their family life. Strict discipline, emotional distance, and physical abuse. Gary claimed that his father would deliver brutal punishments with a studded leather belt, often whipping the children until they were bruised and trembling. Even more horrifying, the housekeepers allegedly administered what they called the drowning treatment, holding the boys under cold bathwater if they dared to speak after bedtime or wake up too early. These weren't isolated events. Gary said the punishment came whether he misbehaved or not. If one brother stepped out of line, they all paid the price. It was a house of fear, not a home. The psychological toll was devastating. Two of Bing Crosby's sons, Dennis and Lindsay, would go on to suffer from deep depression, and tragically, both died by suicide. The press called it heartbreaking. Some critics called it telling. And the problems didn't end within the family. Behind the scenes, Crosby's on-screen chemistry with co-star Bob Hope in the iconic Road to film series was nothing like their real-life relationship. In fact, Bob Hope once confided to a friend that he detested Bing off camera. The friendly banter and comedic timing were real, but only on film. Offset, the charm faded fast. For decades, Bing Crosby was one of the most beloved voices in America. But the stories from those who lived with and worked beside him paint a very different picture. Not of a holiday hero, but of a deeply flawed man whose private life was haunted by cruelty, coldness, and control. A star on stage, a stranger at home. Number 9. Milton Berle. Uncle Milty, or the original joke thief. In the golden age of television, Milton Berle was everywhere. Affectionately known as Uncle Milty, he became a household name in the 1950s, charming millions on Texaco Star Theater and ushering in the era of American TV comedy. But as they say in showbiz, legends cast long shadows. Behind the scenes, Berle developed a notorious reputation as a joke thief, a comic who built his act not just on timing and talent, but on the punchlines of others. Fellow comedians would guard their material when Berle was around, fearful he'd borrow their best lines and claim them as his own. The phrase, "Milton stole my bit," became a common refrain in backstage circles. But one of the most infamous clashes of his later years happened live and in color, at the 1993 MTV Video Music Awards of all places. Berle, then in his 80s, appeared alongside rising star RuPaul, who was at the height of pop culture fame. What was meant to be a quirky, intergenerational handoff quickly spiraled into awkwardness and tension. When Berle went off script and made crass, outdated remarks, RuPaul didn't back down. She snapped back with icy sarcasm, and the moment devolved into an uncomfortable power struggle on live TV. The clash wasn't just generational. It exposed how Berle's style of humor, once revered, had curdled into something outdated, even toxic. But perhaps the most damaging moment came in 1979 when Berle was invited to guest host Saturday Night Live. It was a chance for the veteran comedian to connect with a younger audience. But instead, it became a complete disaster. From the very first rehearsal, Berle attempted to take over the show, disregarding scripts, interrupting sketches, and insisting on using tired vaudeville gags from his heyday. He even demanded camera angles and audience cues that disrupted the entire production process. According to cast and crew, Berle treated the SNL stage like it was still the 1950s, completely ignoring the ensemble format that made the show successful. Creator Lorne Michaels was reportedly so appalled by Burleigh's behavior that he vowed the episode would never air again. And indeed, for decades it was buried, unreleased and uncelebrated. Burleigh was unofficially banned for life from ever returning to Saturday Night Live. In his twilight years, Uncle Milty was remembered by some as a trailblazer, but by others as a relic, unwilling to evolve, and bitter that the spotlight no longer loved him back. A pioneer, yes, but also a punchline. 8. Zsa Zsa, Gabor, glamour, gossip, and a chilling legacy. Few stars embodied old Hollywood glamour quite like Zsa Zsa Gabor. With her Hungarian accent, rhinestone-studded gowns, and endless string of one-liners, she was a walking headline. The original red carpet queen, long before reality TV made that a career. She wasn't just famous, she was famous for being famous. But behind the diamonds and designer dresses was a woman whose personal relationships, especially with her only child, told a much colder story. Zsa Zsa's daughter, Francesca Hilton, was born into American royalty. Her father, Conrad Hilton, the billionaire hotel magnate who founded the Hilton Empire. With a last name like that, you might assume Francesca was set for life, but Hollywood rarely plays fair. As a child, Francesca was a frequent fixture by her mother's side, paraded in front of cameras and at social events. But when she grew older and started pulling away from the glamorous facade, even refusing to wear makeup, Zsa Zsa reportedly began to shut her out. The final blow came after Conrad Hilton's death. The massive Hilton fortune was divided, but Francesca was left with just $100,000, a pittance in the world of billionaires. Zsa Zsa, rather than stepping in to help, offered little support, emotional or financial. Francesca spent the rest of her life battling not only to gain access to what she believed was her rightful inheritance, but also to find stability. She died penniless, homeless, and heartbroken, her final days spent in a shabby Los Angeles apartment, while her mother lived in guarded luxury in Beverly Hills. Friends of the family described the relationship as cold, distant, and at times transactional. Zsa Zsa, they claimed, saw motherhood more as a photo opportunity than a sacred bond. Despite her declining health, Zsa Zsa lived to the astonishing age of 99, defying medical odds with the same flair she brought to every scandal. She was married 9 times, sued multiple people for defamation, slapped a Beverly Hills police officer, and once declared on live television, "I am a marvelous housekeeper. Every time I leave a man, I keep the house." She was outrageous, fabulous, and undeniably iconic. But as critics and fans reflect on her legacy, one question lingers. Was she a trailblazing diva, or a mother who turned her back on her child? Maybe both. Because in Hollywood, the truth is rarely just black and white, even when it's wrapped in diamonds. 7. Errol Flynn, Hollywood's swashbuckling hero with a scandalous shadow. He was the ultimate leading man, dashing, daring, and dangerously charismatic. Errol Flynn, with his devil-may-care grin and sword in hand, leapt across screens in classics like Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood. For millions of moviegoers, he was the gold standard of masculinity in Hollywood's golden age. But off-screen, Flynn's life was far less heroic and far more controversial. In 1980, a bombshell biography titled Errol Flynn, The Untold Story by Charles Hyam, shattered the swashbuckling illusion. The book alleged that Flynn had secret same-sex affairs and even went so far as to suggest he was a Nazi sympathizer, attending pro-German gatherings during World War II. The public was stunned. Could the hero of the silver screen really have harbored such dark allegiances? Many of those claims were later disputed or debunked, and some dismissed the book as sensationalized. But by then, the damage to his mythos was done. And that wasn't even the most explosive part of his legacy. In the 1940s, Flynn faced not 1, but 3 statutory rape trials, a string of legal battles that dragged his name through the headlines. Though he was acquitted in each case, the allegations cast a long, unforgiving shadow over his career. The phrase "in like Flynn," once a playful nod to his romantic charm, suddenly took on a much darker tone. As the years wore on, so did the weight of excess. Flynn, once the most handsome man in Hollywood, began to physically and emotionally unravel. Alcohol, drugs, and a high-octane lifestyle aged him prematurely. By the time he was 50, he looked decades older, a tragic echo of the matinee idol he once was. When Flynn died of a heart attack in 1959, the medical examiner reportedly said his body resembled that of an 85-year-old man. He died in the arms of a much younger woman. Yet another scandal, another headline. But what lingered wasn't just the age gap or the gossip. It was the haunting contradiction between the fantasy and the man behind it. Errol Flynn gave audiences unforgettable heroes. But in real life, he may have played his darkest role off camera, as a man consumed by ego, indulgence, and secrets too big to hide forever. 6. Gene Kelly, Hollywood's Golden Dancer. With a darker footprint, he danced through the rain and Singin' in the Rain, twirled across sets with effortless charm, and defined what it meant to be a triple threat in classic Hollywood. Gene Kelly wasn't just a performer, he was a force of nature. Charismatic, magnetic, electrifying. But beneath that graceful exterior was a man known for being intense, demanding, and at times even cruel behind the camera. Kelly's pursuit of perfection wasn't just artistic. It was personal, relentless, and sometimes painful for those around him. He demanded so much from his dance partners and co-stars that working with him became a test of endurance. Take, for example, Sid Charisse, his frequent co-star and one of the greatest dancers in film history. According to Hollywood lore, whenever she came home bruised and battered, her husband didn't even have to ask. He knew she'd been working with Gene. And Kelly's temper? Infamous. Crew members spoke of sudden outbursts, harsh criticisms, and emotionally bruising rehearsals. If the rhythm was off, if a foot missed its mark, if a performer wasn't feeling the number the way he envisioned, they'd hear about it. Loudly. But Kelly's controversies didn't stop at choreography. In the 1970s, a chilling rumor surfaced, one that painted a far more political and dangerous picture of the beloved entertainer. It was claimed that Gene Kelly had secretly donated £20,000 to the Irish Republican Army, IRA, during a covert fundraising mission in the United States. The money, according to the allegation, was not for peace, but for weapons. One alleged quote still circulates in whispers, "This money is for guns." I don't want it going to any do-gooders. The claim, though widely reported, was fiercely denied by Kelly's widow, Patricia Ward Kelly, who insisted the story only surfaced after Gene's death, and that it didn't match the man she knew. She portrayed him as proud of his Irish heritage, yes, but committed to peace, not violence. Whether true or not, the rumor became part of the Gene Kelly legend, a legend with bright lights but also long shadows. To fans, he remains a dazzling icon of classic cinema, a man who revolutionized the movie musical and danced his way into film history. But to those who worked closest with him, Gene Kelly was a perfectionist whose artistry came at a high cost, measured in bruises, tears, and fractured relationships. He may have glided across the screen, but behind the scenes, his steps left deeper marks than most ever knew. 5. John Wayne, the Duke of Westerns, and the politics that divided Hollywood. Few figures in cinema history are as instantly recognizable as John Wayne. The slow drawl, the towering frame, the swagger that made him the eternal cowboy, the fearless soldier, the ultimate American hero. He wasn't just a movie star, he was a symbol. But the man behind the Duke was far more complex, controversial, and politically polarizing than his clean-cut, all-American persona suggested. Early in his life, believe it or not, John Wayne identified as a socialist and even leaned liberal. But by the 1960s, those views had done a complete 180. He became an outspoken conservative, a vocal supporter of the Vietnam War, and a public champion of Barry Goldwater, the same politician who voted against the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Then came the interview that changed everything. In 1971, Wayne sat down with Playboy magazine and delivered what is now one of the most infamous and damaging interviews in Hollywood history. He openly declared his belief in white supremacy, stating, "I believe in white supremacy until the blacks are educated to a point of responsibility." That wasn't all. He also condemned homosexuality, calling certain films perverse and disgusting, including Midnight Cowboy, which had just won the Academy Award for Best Picture. These were not off-the-cuff remarks. They were chillingly blunt statements that shocked readers and fractured his image. The fallout was swift, and decades later, his words still echo. In recent years, film students have walked out of classrooms, screening his films. Petitions have circulated demanding his name be removed from John Wayne Airport in Orange County, California. And Hollywood continues to wrestle with how to reconcile the icon with the ideology. But here's the twist. The same man who spoke out against the LGBTQ+ community formed a surprising friendship with actor Rock Hudson, one of the first public figures to die of AIDS. The two co-starred in The Undefeated and reportedly remained close until Wayne's death in 1979. So, how do we remember John Wayne? To some, he remains an unshakable symbol of American masculinity, a titan of classic cinema who embodied strength, patriotism, and rugged individualism. To others, he is a reminder that even icons can carry dangerous beliefs, cloaked in charm and cowboy hats. Hollywood gave him the spotlight. History is still deciding what to do with his shadow. 4. Bette Davis, Queen of the Screen, and Queen of the Setbacks. Bette Davis wasn't just a movie star, she was a force of nature. With her fierce glare, razor-sharp wit, and powerhouse performances, she carved out a career in an industry that rarely allowed women to lead, let alone command. She was the first female president of the Academy, the first actress to receive 10 Oscar nominations, and the first to break nearly every rule about what a woman should be in Hollywood. But with that ambition came a reputation, not just as a brilliant actress, but as someone you didn't dare cross. By her own admission, Davis didn't suffer fools, and anyone who got in her way, co-stars, directors, producers, found that out the hard way. One story from the set of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane captures the essence of the real Bette Davis. She and Joan Crawford, her longtime rival, were cast as dueling sisters in one of the most intense psychological thrillers of the 1960s. Their hatred was legendary. On set, the tension was palpable. When Davis was nominated for an Oscar and Crawford wasn't, Crawford campaigned against her, then had the last laugh by accepting the award on stage, on behalf of another actress, while Davis sat and watched. But Davis wasn't only volatile with her enemies, even her collaborators had to tread carefully. Take the infamous incident with director Herschel Daugherty. During a casual dinner, he made the mistake of wagging a finger in her face. That tiny gesture triggered an explosive reaction. Davis stood up, publicly eviscerated him in front of the entire restaurant, delivering a verbal lashing so intense that half the patrons reportedly left. Then, just as quickly, she sat back down and resumed her meal, as if nothing had happened. It wasn't just theatrics. It was Bette being Bette. But some stories from her career veered into something darker. During the filming of Mr. Skeffington, Davis would rinse her eyes between takes to protect them from the scorching studio lights. Her most famous feature. One day, she fell violently ill. Investigators later discovered that her eyewash had been poisoned. To this day, no one knows who did it, but director Vincent Sherman is said to have told police, "If you lined up the cast and crew and asked who wanted to kill Bette Davis, 100 hands would go up." She was brilliant, she was bold, and she was unapologetically herself, in a time when Hollywood wanted women to smile and stay silent. For some, Bette Davis was a nightmare. A diva, a tyrant, impossible to please. But for millions of fans, she was something else entirely. A survivor in an industry built to break women down. As she once famously said, "When a man gives his opinion, he's a man. When a woman gives hers, she's a bitch." And Bette Davis never stopped giving hers. 3. Mickey Rooney, Hollywood's boy wonder, with a scandalous adult life. In the 1930s and 40s, there was no bigger name in Hollywood than Mickey Rooney. He was the kid everyone adored, wide-eyed, energetic, and overflowing with talent. From the Andy Hardy series to musicals with Judy Garland, he was the face of American innocence on screen. But off-screen, Mickey Rooney lived a life that was anything but wholesome. As he grew up, his name remained in lights, not for performances, but for marriages, affairs, betrayals, and scandals. With 8 marriages and dozens of rumored affairs, he became as famous for his love life as he was for his acting. In his no-holds-barred autobiography, Life is Too Short, Rooney revealed explicit details about his sexual conquests, proudly bragging about his first visit to a brothel, guided by none other than fellow comedian Milton Berle. He described witnessing fellow Hollywood icon Tallulah Bankhead in a lesbian encounter, and exposed countless private moments involving his ex-wives, lovers, and even friends. But perhaps the most shocking detail? Rooney outed Judy Garland, yet his closest friend and co-star, for a same-sex affair, an incredibly invasive revelation that many felt was both betraying and exploitative, especially considering Garland wasn't alive to respond. And it didn't stop there. In a disturbing claim made years later in 2019, journalist Craig Bennett alleged that Rooney engaged in a relationship with a 14-year-old Elizabeth Taylor during the filming of National Velvet. Rooney was 24 at the time. While the accusation remains heavily disputed and without formal confirmation, it added to a growing pile of stories painting him as reckless, arrogant, and dangerously inappropriate, especially toward women. Even his marriages weren't safe from scrutiny. His first wife? Ava Gardner, one of the most beautiful women in Hollywood. In his memoir, Rooney casually and graphically described her private anatomy, an act widely condemned as disrespectful and dehumanizing. As he aged, Rooney drifted further from his golden boy image and leaned into a strange kind of self-parody. He popped up in sitcoms, made guest appearances on The Simpsons, and even poked fun at himself, but the damage to his legacy had long been done. Behind the twinkle in his eye and that fast-talking charm was a man many insiders described as abrasive, egotistical, and deeply self-centered. Mickey Rooney died in 2014 at the age of 93. And even then, controversy followed him to the grave, including reports of elder abuse, financial mismanagement, and an $18,000 estate left behind after decades in show business. He was once the highest-paid actor in the world. But in the end, Mickey Rooney's story became a cautionary tale of early fame, unchecked ego, and the very real cost of living your entire life under the spotlight, with no filter and no shame. Number 2, Joan Crawford, Hollywood's Ice Queen, and Mommy Dearest. She was the epitome of old Hollywood elegance, a star with cheekbones that could cut glass, eyes that could pierce a soul, and a screen presence so commanding, she redefined what it meant to be a leading lady. But Joan Crawford's legacy isn't just measured in Oscars and unforgettable performances. It's also haunted by a single phrase: no wire hangers, ever. Immortalized in her adopted daughter's devastating memoir, Mommy Dearest, Crawford's carefully constructed image of maternal perfection and movie star charm came crashing down in the most public and brutal way possible. According to Christina Crawford, life behind the gates of Joan's estate was a waking nightmare. She claimed her mother was obsessively controlling, emotionally volatile, and physically abusive, often triggered by the smallest infractions like slouching or, yes, using a wire hanger. Christina alleged that Joan's glamorous persona was just that, a performance, and that the children were mere props, adopted not out of love but for publicity value. While some of Crawford's friends and 2 of her other adopted children disputed the allegations, others quietly admitted that Joan had an explosive temper, a drinking problem, and a near pathological obsession with cleanliness, control, and image. But the real drama didn't stop at home. Joan's infamous feud with fellow screen legend Bette Davis is the stuff of Hollywood legend. And it reached its peak during the filming of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane? The two women despised each other, and it showed. Joan allegedly filled her costume with weights to make Davis strain, while dragging her across the floor in one scene. Davis later claimed she'd injured her back because of it. When Bette was nominated for an Oscar for her performance and Joan wasn't, Crawford didn't just sulk, she orchestrated the ultimate revenge. She contacted all the other Best Actress nominees, offered to accept the award on their behalf if they couldn't attend. And when Anne Bancroft won for The Miracle Worker, Crawford marched on stage, gleaming, and accepted the award in front of a fuming Bette Davis. It was the kind of move only Joan Crawford could pull off. Elegant, ruthless, unforgettable. And then there was the matter of her will. When Joan died in 1977, she left behind an estate worth over $2 million. But in her final act of cruelty, she cut Christina and her brother Christopher out completely, leaving them nothing. Her will stated, "It is my intention to make no provision herein for my son Christopher or my daughter Christina for reasons which are well known to them." The rest of her fortune was divided among her two other adopted daughters, longtime staff, and charities. Whether it was an act of justice or vengeance depends on who you ask. To some, Joan Crawford was the ultimate survivor. A poor Texas girl who rose from laundry lines to movie marquees, mastering reinvention in a man's world. To others, she was a manipulative perfectionist who controlled everything and everyone around her, even at the cost of her children's well-being. As Christina once said, she was Joan Crawford 24 hours a day. 1. Charlie Chaplin, the genius behind the tramp, and the man behind the mask. Few figures in the history of cinema have left a legacy as monumental, or as complicated, as Charlie Chaplin. He was a silent film pioneer, a comedic master, a visionary director whose character, the Tramp, became one of the most recognizable icons in the world. Chaplin didn't just entertain, he moved people. He made them laugh, cry, and think. City Lights, Modern Times, The Great Dictator, timeless masterpieces that proved comedy could carry political weight, emotional power, and artistic brilliance. But the man behind the bowler hat and cane was far from innocent. Chaplin was a notoriously difficult perfectionist, known for his explosive temper, controlling behavior, and obsessive attention to detail. His sets were more like battlefields than playgrounds. Actors were fired for the slightest misstep. Scenes were reshot hundreds of times. Some collaborators even claimed he pushed people to the brink, demanding complete obedience and erasing anyone who didn't meet his impossible standards. The perfection showed on screen, but it came at a steep cost behind it. And then there was his personal life. Chaplin's relationships were plagued by controversy, not just for infidelity and emotional abuse, but for his disturbing preference for much younger women. He married his first wife when she was just 17. His second wife? 16. Perhaps most scandalous of all was his final marriage to Una O'Neill, the 18-year-old daughter of Nobel Prize-winning playwright Eugene O'Neill, while Chaplin was 54. The age gap caused a family rift so severe that Una's father disowned her, and they never reconciled. Although the couple remained together for the rest of Chaplin's life, reports indicate even this marriage was deeply imbalanced, with Chaplin maintaining strict control over his much younger wife. The scandal didn't end with his relationships. In the 1940s, Chaplin became the subject of FBI investigations and was branded a communist sympathizer. Amid Cold War paranoia, he was accused of un-American activities and hounded by the press and the U.S. government. In 1952, while traveling to Europe for a film premiere, he was barred from re-entering the United States. Effectively exiled, he spent the rest of his life in Switzerland, a living symbol of how quickly Hollywood can turn on its own. Even in death, Chaplin couldn't escape the bizarre. In 1978, over a year after he passed, the grave robbers stole his body and held it for ransom. The culprits were eventually caught, and Chaplin's body was recovered and reburied, this time in a reinforced concrete grave, to ensure that even in death, no one could disturb the tramp again. Charlie Chaplin was a genius, yes, a pioneer, a poet of silence, and an artist unlike any the world had ever seen. But he was also a man of contradictions. one whose brilliance was often accompanied by cruelty, scandal, and disturbing personal choices. He made the world laugh, and in many ways changed it. But behind the smile was a man many who knew him feared, resented, or misunderstood. And maybe that's the final truth of classic Hollywood. The legends we admire from afar often look very different up close. And sometimes the performance never ended, even when the camera stopped rolling. Which of these stars shocked you the most? Was it the violent disciplinarian behind Bing Crosby's croon? The calculated fury of Joan Crawford? Or the predator behind Chaplin's genius? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon for more revealing journeys through the golden, and sometimes tarnished, age of cinema. Thanks for watching Classic Hollywood, because the past isn't just glamorous, it's complicated,